name is Marcy Bergen. I'm the Member Services Coordinator at AFSA. Welcome to Changing Consumer Behavior is Stress Testing All Stakeholders Business Practices, presented by Jenn Reid. This presentation is a part of AFSA's Business Partner Webinar Series, which allows industry experts to share timely, educational topics directly with AFSA members. The webinars are designed to provide information that will allow AFSA members to more effectively design, develop, and implement strategies for their company's success. For more information about the series or how to become a presenter, feel free to reach out to me following today's presentation. A few housekeeping notes. To ask a question, use the question box on the side of your screen. The slides and recording of today's webinar will be available later today on AFSA's website in the Webinar Resource Center. Finally, you'll receive a survey after the webinar is over. Please take a moment to complete it. Your responses help us fine-tune the program so we can target the issues that are important to you. A bit about our presenter. Jenn Reid is Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for MarketScan Information Systems. With nearly 2 decades in the automotive industry, Reid has senior operational and executive experience in the dealer, lender, and information services sectors. Reid's mission is to help elevate the automotive industry to exciting new levels, developing and strengthening industry relationships that leverage science, technology, and data to improve the consumer experience and create more transactionable opportunities. Reid accomplishes this by partnering with today's leading lenders, manufacturers, data providers, and dealers to further the use of innovative solutions and game-changing analytics.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining me today. First, I'd like to thank the AFSA team for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. I appreciate the invitation to discuss the topic of how changing consumer behavior is stress testing all stakeholders' business practices. The automotive industry has faced its share of obstacles and uncertainty over the past 12 months. From the pandemic itself, the rush to implement digital retailing solutions, inventory shortages, and accommodating consumers through new and redefined purchase and financing processes, all at an accelerated speed and through some very challenging economic times. Illustrated through some recent consumer research MarketScan conducted, I will discuss how consumer behaviors, particularly around the digital retailing, is challenging the industry to accelerate meeting the needs and preferences of consumers. Ultimately, the goal is to provide consumers a consistent and improved experience across the journey. In order to realize this goal, it will require information that can be used to transact online or in the showroom consistently, and will require engagement and strategies executed much earlier in the process. Today, I will focus on the lending segment and a few of the consumer behaviors that I think are important for you all to consider and determine how to best adopt within your business and your strategy sessions. Today, I will cover lender pain points, 3 consumer behaviors that need to be factored into your strategy and business. Those 3 are: the consumers expect to be digitally empowered, both in experience and with personalized information. Consumer decisions are being made up front, particularly around financing. In affordability, it's front and center, and it's all about the payment. Then we're going to cover some best practices to consider incorporating or to help elevate your strategy. We're going to touch base on some key takeaways, and then I'm going to do a quick highlight on who MarketScan Information Systems is, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. Looking forward to the time today, let's dive in. To start, I'd like to cover some industry trends and pain points that we've heard from clients in some of the discussions that we've had over the past year. The first one, and I don't know that this is really unique to this past year, it's really one that's always ongoing, but certainly was stress tested, is around capturing market share. Between the pandemic, inventory shortages, uncertain economic climate, particularly around unemployment, and trying to determine what level of risk you're as a business willing to take while comfortably still capturing the business that you need to continue to perform and grow your business was certainly a challenge. And there was really no shortages of challenges in terms of trying to capture market share last year. Finding the balance between direct and indirect strategies was another one, particularly when it came to digital retailing, as that's really opening up this conversation for many companies. This is age old, and you find this talked about quite often in many financial institutions. Do you connect directly with the consumer and risk upsetting your dealer relationships, or do you go indirect to the consumer. However, seeing that the trends in the vehicles being transacted online and consumers are all making the decisions up front. There was the underwriting and originating loans both digitally and remotely, and this one really speaks for itself. You all had to adopt and scale at a rapid pace and have the ability to give your team the tools that they needed to be able to continue to operate remotely to enable business to continue to happen. There was vehicle valuations and asset management challenges. Are the vehicle prices going up, down? Are they inflated? What will happen to leases when they need to come due, but they can't be dropped off? And there was many scenarios that paid out last year that had to have kept some risk in the marketing managers on the edge of their chairs. And then there's EVs. Deciding what the strategies around EVs is a conversation that's becoming very prevalent, and you're hearing a lot about it in the news, particularly with some of the announcements from the OEMs. What programs need to be developed? What will their residual values be? This is still emerging, and however, there's still much to learn and develop. And then there's evolving to meet consumer expectations and their changing behaviors, while ultimately maintaining those dealer relationships. This one is still very much playing out, and it has been for a long time. The shift to consumers driving the change and transformation is ushering a new era and dynamic in the space that's pushing many companies, including lenders, to places that likely would have challenged them or met with resistance 5 to 7 years ago. It's creating a great deal of opportunity for many, but it's certainly taking a lot of adopting and changing to be able to keep up with all the transformation that's happening. Today, although we'll touch on some best practices that will help solve for multiple of these pain points, we're going to focus on the last point: evolving to meet the consumer expectations and changing behaviors. 3 consumer behaviors that need to be factored or part of the discussions around your strategy and business are: the first, which I don't think will be a surprise, consumers expect to be digitally empowered, both in experience and with personalized information. CarGurus did a great study that showed pre-COVID, only 35% of consumers were open to buying a vehicle online. Well, fast forward about a year, and now over 60% are willing to consider purchasing a vehicle online. In the survey that we conducted, financing or pre-approval was the top aspect of the online process that mattered the most, with over 50% of the respondents selecting this, which, as many of us know, there's very limited options, especially in the pool of the dealer portfolio in terms of lenders and indirect lenders that actually offer much of that information upfront, beyond perhaps being able to submit a credit app that gets sent to the dealership. So there's a great opportunity there to consider how that might play into your strategy. It's also worth noting that 45% said price and payment negotiation is important, and that's no surprise. I'm certainly not surprised, but it's now confirmed that over half of the respondents said rate financing and pre-approval is the most important element of the online experience. And again, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's still an area that very much needs additional focus for many of the lenders out there. And decisions are being made upfront, particularly around financing. This sort of second point is one that I think is really important to acknowledge that, as an industry, we really saw that step is in the late funnel of the sales process and very much in the F&I office. However, that has moved way up funnel even before the customer really engages in the dealership or selects the vehicle. Another question, which you can see here, that we asked was the biggest frustration consumers experience during the online experience. One of those top frustrations, which was for over 42%, was not having all of the components of the shopping process available online. So consumers are telling us that we're not meeting those needs. And when we ask the consumers to rate which factor most likely would motivate them to complete the transaction online, over 40% of the consumers said that it's the ability to secure financing online would help motivate them to complete the full transaction. And here's another study that you can see here on the screen, is that, and it speaks to the point around convenience and ease of shopping for consumers. Over 65% of consumers said they'd actually be willing to pay a little bit more or give up some of the negotiation to help offset the cost of technology and delivery and convenience. This is great news because oftentimes many have attributed this to potentially less profit. What consumers are saying is they're willing to pay a premium to be able to get the information that they need and the convenience and be able to transact online. So it's a great opportunity to look at, from an investment perspective, what tools are needed to be able to enable that. Another 2021 automotive study, Trust, Transparency in the Transaction, that recently came out from our checks and was done in conjunction with Root & Associates, highlighted that 9 out of 10 consumers reported that receiving a final out-the-door price and payment is important in the very first interaction. This highlights the need for all the information to be available in order to meet the consumer's expectations. The last behavior that I want to focus on, and again, this is one that's been talked about quite a bit, but it needs to really remain a focus, is around affordability. It's front and center, and it's all about the payment. We asked a question, and you can see this here on the slide, and it was, how much variance in a quoted payment does it take for a consumer to lose trust in the dealer? And really, the answer should concern many retailers because their credibility is on the line. There's absolutely a stigma and a history of the perception of dealers and the lack of trust. However, based on what we saw and what we see every day, oftentimes it's the lack of all the information being quoted together up front that drives that discrepancy, and less about that the dealer is actually trying to mislead the consumer. And what we saw is the payment variance that the customer will lose trust and walk away is 21% said less than $50, which we all know by the time you add on tax, title, registration, dealer fees, and anything else that may get factored in, very often $50 goes pretty fast. We saw over 29% say between 50 and 75, 26% said 75 to 100, and then 23% said more than 100. When you add up the elements that often are not included, as I mentioned a minute ago, in the advertised payments that consumers, or the estimated payments that the consumers are getting online, there's a substantial difference. And I can't stress enough that we have to, as an industry, bring all the components together so that we're actually quoting accurate information that a consumer can transact at. And lastly, I think this is a good point to wrap up on. Over 45% of consumers said price and payments mattered the most online in the vehicle shopping. So it's important that we show them all the options that they have available to them. And I think this is a great opportunity for lenders because you are all part of the options in a dealer's portfolio. So figuring out a way to be able to engage consumers upfront and still maintain a dealer relationship is certainly something that needs to be leaned into. And we're going to talk about in just a minute. The first strategy that I'd like to propose that you consider incorporating is around the digital strategy. And that's qualification through delivery, both from a direct and an indirect perspective. Where the former theme often was debated within lending institutions relative to whether do we go direct, do we go indirect, do we do both? Now the conversation really needs to be around the digital strategy and how to engage with the consumer throughout the entire journey. If you're still having the direct versus indirect debate internally, I would really suggest shifting that focus to be much more holistic around what your overall digital strategy is, regardless of if it's indirect or direct. Lenders need to be able to engage with consumers when and where they need financial information. And in most cases, this is happening much, much earlier than the dealership. And in order to do this and make sure that they have accurate information in today's world, dealers need to understand and recognize the benefit of having consumers educated by accurate information that they can ultimately profitably transact at, versus having to cut deals in attempts to achieve an online or advertised price. As we saw earlier, customers are willing to pay a premium to get the experience. And so this is a perfect opportunity to look at what symbiotic relationship can come together with the lending segment and the dealership segment to make sure that customers are getting the right information up front. Traditionally, most of auto lending has really been more indirect, which has meant that early funnel and digital channels has not been a place that lenders have really played or focused their strategy. beyond being able to potentially submit an application or make an online payment. However, the opportunity is absolutely there to be part of the experience and help by providing personalized financing scenarios. More shopping experience personalization and less vehicle personalization, particularly with shortage of vehicle components, is going to be important. So let's translate that for some more context. At this time, any stakeholder should adopt a customer-first strategy when the company devises a buyer strategy and a process, as opposed to a seller strategy and process. In a nutshell, from a consumer's perspective, you need to be able to answer the question, are we easy to do business with? Do we have a process that's easy to navigate and for customers to get the information they need? Well, if your answer is no to either of those questions, you really do have a problem that you need to address if you're going to be successful in what's happening within the consumer space and their expectations. The other piece is around accuracy. According to the CFA, the number one complaint continues to be exaggerations or falsifications in advertising or sales of both new and used vehicles, shady financing practices, and car leasing. This has been on that list for quite some time, despite all the progress the industry has made. The line between false advertising of payments can be very much blurred in the consumer's eyes. Despite all the small print advertising disclosures telling them what could be plus plus in the payment that they've been quoted, they still feel misled when there's a substantial increase, and it absolutely can impact their ability to afford a particular vehicle. The solution is when consumers are quoted payments, everything must be taken into account so that they're making the decisions based off a transactable payment. From a consumer's perspective, any solution that's not transactable or accurate has one of three results. The consumer is either paying too much per month for what they're driving lesser vehicle than what they can afford, they simply pass on the transaction because it doesn't fit their budget. And in this case, not only do you risk your market share, but so do you, dealer. There is a lack of awareness of what it truly takes to quote a payment. And that's correctly, that a consumer can actually transact that. And this is something that it can be the lack of awareness or the belief that it's good enough to give payment estimates. But in order to really truly enable and calculate accurate payments, you've got to take in the following data sources and make sure that they're all factored in. The first, I'm going to start with you all, the lender class of data. The ability to factor in parameters and policies that you all underwrite with to ensure that it is in line with what the consumer gets when they select the vehicle is really important. In many cases, there's many dealers or marketing companies, digital retailing platforms, for ease, use the captive program only. And when they use these payment models, you look at it from a standpoint of, well, that likely the perception is the best program out there. However, when you look across all of the lenders' portfolio of lenders, there's often better options for that consumer. And when you factor those programs in with OEM incentives, it is not unheard of and often very common that you can find better scenarios for consumers looking at the portfolio of lenders that a dealership has. And it can be substantial. We've seen cases every single month where there's $50 to $150 more per month for that same consumer, same scenario, just a very much different and lower payment, which that obviously has a really big impact on the consumer's budget. Then there's the manufacturer class of data. This is the elements that can impact the payment. So there's the basic data like year, make, model, trim, description, cost, MSRP, weight, shipping, gas guzzler, EPA mileage, bore stroke, and a number of cylinders in the car. And I bet you're scratching your head now asking, hey, Jen, why'd you feel the need to list all those elements out? Well, if you want accurate payments, depending on the state you're in, all of these elements can be factored into the registration of a vehicle and can change the payment. Then there's the complex data. That's the rebates and incentives. That's all the automatic rebates that apply to everyone, but are dictated whether it's a retail or lease transaction. And they're the rebates that are package specific and or conditional. And the four most common conditional many of you are going to be familiar with, right? That's the college grad, the military, the loyalty, and the conquest. But one of the big pain points out there is that a large number of rebates that they just get missed every single month. And that's an adverse impact to the consumer, and certainly the equity position that they have in their vehicle, which ultimately is an impact to their budget and their affordability, and also actually provides you guys a higher level of risk in terms of the equity position that customer is in their vehicle. And then there's the municipality class of data. And that's the laws, the rules, the regulations, the calculation methodologies, the tax percentage rates, the registration fee calculations, which are all vastly different across the entire country. And then you have the dealer class, which is often overlooked. And these are the terms and conditions under which the dealer is actually willing to transact. It incorporates things like dealer's fees, selling price rules, rate markup, and how that individual dealer interprets the tax laws, which again, you may laugh at me for sharing this one. However, if you count Washington, D.C., there's 51 markets in the United States, each with its own unique quoting rules. Of them, 13 have tax rules that are black and white, and the other 38 are somewhat vague and ambiguous. Some dealers take a highly aggressive approach to their interpretation of tax laws. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are those dealers who very much take a conservative approach. These two approaches generate vastly different payments, and as it relates to you as a lender and the loan advance. And so, again, this is one of those that often don't get quoted till very much later in the process. But having the ability and the technology to be able to bring this up front will go a long way to really help ensure that the consumer is getting quoted a payment that they can transact at. And last, there's the consumer class. This is obviously the wild card until you have that consumer engaged in the process. However, understanding their specific situation, whether self-reported or leveraging digital solutions that can help you get a view into the consumer, the more you can understand up front in the process will help personalize those financial terms. As you can see, what many people consider easy to quote rates is actually fairly complex, which leads consumers to really being quoted estimates or payment ranges. However, that puts the dealer in a very difficult position when they engage the consumer, and it adds to the lack of trust when they provide the payments that are different or particularly higher. And ultimately, I'm sure many of you have been on the other end of that, where a dealer is calling you to rehash or rework a deal to try to get to terms that meet what the consumer was expecting when they walked in. And lastly, it's important for lenders to have the ability to underwrite and originate digitally. However, it's important that you also be able to share that information with the dealer to maintain that level of engagement. And ideally, increase the chances that that deal stays with you from a lending perspective, because it's already approved and the consumer has already agreed to the terms selected. So what you can do, and one of the things that I think is really important to understand is, in order to enable that, is you need to be able to provide all the elements so that the dealer can replicate the structure and the complete transaction. So this is going to be more and more important as more and more sales move online, and the consumers are doing more and more in the process. And what we've learned from a market scan perspective is that providing partners the granularity to ensure a deal structure is replicated, it really is a win-win for the dealer and the consumer, and it speeds up the process. So I encourage you to look at, when you are underwriting loans that potentially are early in the funnel or offering pre-approval or pre-qualification, make sure there's a mechanism in which to get that information to the dealer. It's a much more frictionless process, and it's something that can really go a long way to speeding the deal up and help you capture more deals. And certainly that there's lenders out there that are really blazing the trail in doing this and being very successful in maintaining a large percentage and share of the business. The next suggestion I have is around partner, partner, partner. Be everywhere and consistently. That's going to mean tech platforms, consumer sites, and dealerships. From our research, 41% of the respondents said that their top frustrations associated with the fact that not all the required elements were available online or in the process when they needed it. And 43% said they experienced discrepancies between what they found online in the offer that they got and what they were provided by the dealership. The good news is that there are solutions available to eliminate that disconnect, and partnerships across the industry are needed to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Let's highlight some of those important partnerships to consider within your business. The first, and this is one you already have, is dealerships. It's critical that they're in lockstep with you to eliminate that disconnect. And as I previously mentioned, incorporating their terms and partnering with them to profitably turn their inventory is a very strong relationship. From the survey we did, consumers are willing to pay that premium to transact online. So there is an opportunity to increase profitability by giving consumers the information they need. And by enabling dealers and not cutting the profit out of their deals and finding that right balance is a really powerful partnership that is really going to be important to continue to help grow business and grow market share in the future. Then there's the consumer sites. And, like it or not, these sites are the ones that are educating the consumers, and they can be a great asset, but they can also be a liability for both you and the dealer if they're providing the consumer information that's just not correct or accurate. And if they're quoting payments without including your information or leveraging programs that fit into that dealer's portfolio of lenders, they really can do more harm than good than quoting the information that doesn't take everything into account. However, it's a great opportunity to partner with these sites to make the information available and to ensure that consumers are being educated with information that's going to actually empower them and help deliver the best and most personalized experience. Then there's the technology platforms. And these guys you need to be involved with and engaged with to help deliver and receive the right information at the right time across the entire consumer journey. And it needs to be consistent. This technology is still evolving, but it's very much available today. And for instance, Markets Began is powering over 40 of these technology platforms where the payment disconnect is minimal to non-existent. We help all of our partners pull together the necessary steps and elements so that they can focus on the customer experience and delivering technology enhancements that's really moving the needle to meet the level of customer service that customers are looking for. The third strategy that we're going to suggest is around having a defined data strategy, both internal and external. There's been a lot of talk over the years regarding transparency on the price of the vehicle, and we're making strides in terms of the ability to disclose and provide pricing and payment transparency around the back-end products from a dealer perspective, which ultimately is an important profit center for the dealer. However, the continuum of that is that there is a need to have transparency on the lender programs or have options available to be able to show or get financing upfront, whether that be instead of providing the data in the programs, the ability to actually go ahead and underwrite and pre-approve loans. With over 85% of the new vehicles being financed, if there is not visibility earlier in the process on what the consumer can expect in terms of financing, there will continue to be a disconnect when it comes to what's being quoted either by dealer or third parties. And that just ultimately is going to be substantially different than what they ultimately get delivered at. To offer transparency on programs and to help enable payment accuracy and affordability, it will be important to explore partnering with companies that can help get that information to the place that it needs to be and to act on it. So some examples of this are websites, digital retailing platforms, CRMs, marketing companies. The days of keeping information secret, internal, proprietary, and sharing generic programs is not going to help in terms of really closing the gap between what consumers are quoted and what they get delivered at. And it's going to continue to generate discrepancies and ultimately continue to fuel the image of a lack of trust. So if we want to provide a seamless consumer experience, it's going to be important that in some way, consumers be able to get accurate and generated payments earlier in the process. And it might be counterintuitive that if you have the opportunity to grow your business by sharing more of that information, but lenders are out there improving it. And it's whether you're qualifying consumers upfront for financing, providing more accurate programs. There are a small number of lenders that are absolutely enabling this to happen, and they're growing their business very competitively, and they're positioned to capture more market share as more and more of this process and decisions can happen up front. So it's really important. I think it's something that each lender has to decide what is sort of their culture and what their comfort level is. but I would definitely have the open discussion in terms of, how much information is being provided and where it's being provided and to who, and partner with those companies that can help get the insights where they need. And as previously discussed, lender program information is so critical, and it's just often missing in getting the payments accurate to enable the consumers to really assess their affordability. And if all the lending programs aren't analyzed that are in a dealership portfolio and only a single option or rate metric is used, then the consumer often suffers and risks paying more than they can afford, or getting bumped or having a bad experience. Understanding this is absolutely going to require a cultural shift for many lenders in terms of the perspective on how much information can be shared and what the risk is competitively. However, there's absolutely a world where you can find a balance to provide that information and it ultimately benefit and help grow your business. And it's going to take that coming together from a space and all the different parties to really solve the pain point around that disparate payment being quoted online versus the showroom. The fourth suggestion that we have is take a market view approach to your programs and be dynamic and be targeted, because certainly the ecosystem is evolving very quickly. The age of monthly and quarterly programs is probably coming to an end. And if, especially for your non-captive lenders, it is a competitive advantage that you have with the ability to be nimble and to really assess the market and look at your position. It seems like it is a legacy of our industry for many that OEMs, lenders, credit unions, that we continue to take a non-scientific approach to the way we design our programs. Certainly, there's a lot of analytics that go into assessing the risk and the profitability. However, at the end of the day, it's really important that programs be designed for the market level and what's happening in the space. And certainly there's got to be the view from a competitive standpoint. And I know many of you use various different tools that are out there, but there's absolutely analytic tools that can help you do peer analysis and see how you are viewed in the ecosystem. It's no secret that if you've got a payment that's $100 higher with the same structure and same credit tier, it's very likely you're not going to capture that deal. Vice versa, if you're $100 better, do you need to be $100 better? Or can you redeploy that in other places to get more business and capture more market share? This is an area that MarketScan has focused on quite a bit. And it's absolutely an area that in the age of technology, data, insights, you really can do market level analysis and understand how you are positioned. And you can do that whether it be to the vehicle level, you can do it to the credit level, you can look at different deals and structures. But it's definitely something that if you don't currently today, I would look at how you can adopt that into your business. Because very much from a consumer perspective and a dealer perspective, they're going to be looking at you in terms of from various different angles. And at the end of the day, it's important that you look at yourself that way too. So I encourage you to take a look at the tools that you're using, really assess, does it give you a current view of what's happening in the market now so that you can adjust the strategies versus looking at legacy, things that are happening 90, 100, 120 days ago. It's important to see what's going on in the market now. And certainly as we saw last year with the pandemic, month to month, you're going to be navigating a lot of different changes over the next year to 2 years. And so it's important that you have that intelligence at your fingertips so that you can adopt and change your programs to meet the needs of what's happening in the marketplace and make sure you're successful to win the business and the market share that you want to capture. The fifth strategy that we're going to talk about today is around monitoring asset value and program opportunities to help retain consumers in the portfolio, both from a retention and a risk mitigation perspective. Understanding the position in the vehicle is so important right now. Whether you've got a consumer that's paying a premium for a vehicle due to the shortage, or used vehicle values that continue to be high or volatile. And according to recent Black Book data, there does still remain to be certain volatility in the collateral values within the market. I encourage you to continue to watch and monitor this information. However, the data combined with proper payment trend insights can help make the right decision in terms of managing which vehicles you want to increase or decrease in your portfolio. Higher collateral values provide an opportunity for consumers to change vehicles while enabling lenders to effectively manage their remarketing efforts. So taking a look at opportunities that are in your dealership's partners' inventories in conjunction with your programs, and whether this be floor plan dealers or active dealers that you have a good relationship with, can help provide opportunities to customers, whether they want to upgrade or right size in their vehicle because they need a more affordable payment when experiencing challenges. But using these strategies to be able to identify opportunities in the market to turn over the inventory and the assets in your portfolio is really a critical element that you have right now. And this is not something that just because you looked at an opportunity one month and it wasn't there doesn't mean it's not the next. So developing a program or ability to be able to get consumers an option to take advantage of, windows in the market is a great way to be able to not only partner with your dealers, but also be able to help turn over your portfolios in a way that helps mitigate the risk. And even more important, there's a lot of folks out there that are going through some hard times, but they're continuing to pay, or they need the transportation to be able to continue to have those incomes. So for many lenders, particularly the community-based ones, it's really important that you take a look and see if there's programs that you can create to help keep customers with their the transportation, but with that affordable payment. COVID-19 has resulted in a renewed interest and focus on personal and vehicle ownership. That's a great sign for lease and retail. And it's certainly something that, there's a lot of buzz out there around subscription, EV, and alternative models. But right now, consumers do want reliable transportation and are showing favoritism towards ownership. So this is a great time to really mine and search your portfolio for opportunities and help retain them and keep that market share. And this is something from a standpoint that we've done within our portfolio with our lenders to be able to scan and help look at their programs and be able to identify and surface those opportunities. And there's ones doing it very successfully. So in summary, I'd like to just recap real quickly some of the best practices that we propose today that you consider. The first, make sure you have a digital strategy. And that digital strategy should really cover qualification through delivery. And that's for both direct and indirect. Second, partner, partner, partner. Be everywhere and be consistent. The third is have a defined data strategy, both from an internal perspective as well as external. The fourth is take a market view approach to programs. Be dynamic, be targeted so that you can continue to evolve with the market and continue to win. And then lastly, monitor asset values and program opportunities to help retain your consumers in your portfolio, in addition to managing some of the dynamics that you see, whether it's having to manage through some potential collateral risk in terms of upcoming vehicles, or credit risk, where you have consumers that are facing challenges in what's happening in their life. Well, that concludes today. And just before we wrap up and take questions, I just want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about who MarketScan Information Systems is. MarketScan was founded in 1988. And even though we've been around for over 3 decades, we behave like a startup business by continually pushing the technology envelope. We are privately owned and operated, and our headquarters are in Camarillo, California, about 50 miles northwest of Los Angeles, with the beautiful Santa Monica Mountains at our doorstep. MarketScan provides technology, business intelligence, SaaS enterprise solutions to 4 verticals within the automotive space, and that's auto dealers, lenders, manufacturers, and then technology companies, both consumer and dealer facing. We have experienced and been very blessed with unprecedented growth over the past 12 months. Our solutions are now being used in more than 8,500 dealerships, and we are proud to have entered into some very strategic and amazing partnerships with industry leaders, including Automotive News, General Motors, Roadster, Techion, and Frickin' Tech, in addition to a host of other key players in the OEM and lending sector. Suffice to say, we have tremendous coverage in all 4 verticals. And one of the things that we really take and pride ourselves on is being a good partner. And this is something that, as we wrap up today, I certainly welcome continued discussions to talk about these topics or any others as you go down this journey. With that, I'd like to thank you for the time today, and I'm looking forward to answering some questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Jen. We're going to start off with the first question. Where do you see digital retailing going this year compared with in 2020 when the pandemic first hit?
This is a good question, Marcy. It's and certainly given the changes over the past year, certainly one that I think can go several different ways depending on what happens in the market. But I do think some key themes are, that it's going to continue to evolve. We saw such an acceleration in the innovation and the transformation very quickly, but I think the sophistication and how the companies integrate into both the retailing and financing process, I think is very much going to continue to evolve and become more and more sophisticated. I do think competition for the consumer experience will be strong, and expectations from the consumer are going to continue to rise. And you're going to see players both inside and outside of auto that really look to solve this problem. So it's going to be, I think, really important to really focus on, like we mentioned earlier, the partnerships. And we're going to see that the key players, I think both big and small, are going to recognize that they can't be everything to everybody. So it's just, you're going to see those partnerships forming to bring the pieces and the elements together, because the consumer experience really, in our opinion, can't be solved until you bring those elements together. So I think digital retailing still has, a lot of maturing that's going to happen, and there's going to be some great innovation. But I do think it's a great year for opportunity. I think the progressive lenders have, a window and an opportunity to really move up funnel and be part of that experience in that process, to be able to capture more business and be part of that demand up front. And I think they're ultimately going to be rewarded for that. So, but that's just some key thoughts.
Great, thank you, Jen. Another question is, some industry experts believe 2021 will be a year of healthy growth in sales. How can lenders continue to leverage data to maximize their opportunities in such a healthy climate?
Another good question. So first, I think the first thing when it comes to data, it's really important to know what you're trying to solve for, like what the outcome you're trying to seek is. There's no shortage of data out there. And I think it depends on where in the value chain you're focusing. But I do think there are opportunities across the entire value chain to leverage data to be more targeted and more effective in your strategies. So just a couple thoughts that come to mind, are around, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, but acquisition and retention of consumers, leveraging the data that you have on consumers, things like the current vehicle preferences, the position in the vehicle. I really do believe it's a great opportunity for lenders, and dealers have been doing this for a very long time, to find those opportunities to trade customers out of vehicles. But I do think there's a great opportunity for lenders and dealers to work together, and lenders really leveraging some of that dealer inventory and dealer inventory data to be able to find those opportunities to capture and retain customers would be one example. I think the market level data and analytics, for a very long time, you can leverage data in historical year over year, and you can trend information. But I do think it's going to be really important, as much as the market is changing and the dynamics, that you try to find the most current data and really look at how you're positioned in the market, today versus a lot of that legacy data. So I think being able to do that competitive analysis, the peer analysis, being very targeted on the programs or the business and the risk profiles that you're looking to capture, I would say is another example. And then I think the last one I'm going to point out, actually there's probably two more. One, around being able to personalize the experience with the consumer. We talked about earlier, are you easy to do business with, specifically online? And personalization is really important. And certainly the tech companies and the dealers and the OEMs are focusing very heavily on that. And I think that's an opportunity as well to leverage the data that you have as a lender to be able to figure out how to personalize those experiences even further, and step into being part of that solution. Because the financing piece and what a consumer pays every month, again, is a very personal thing. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for lenders to really leverage their data in that way. Obviously, consumers are showing that they will consent to have their data used if it's for purposes of improving that experience. And then lastly, I think on the risk and account management front, just the continuation of monitoring, collateral values and looking for those opportunities. I don't think it always has to be about, sort of a risk or waiting for delinquency for things like that to happen. I think that tied with a retention strategy is really important. And, as you saw in the Black Book graph, you see these periods of really high used car values, and specifically some makes and models. And we're going to see supply continue to be a challenge for quite some time. So I think there's opportunities that you can leverage to, find those right consumers to be able to keep them within your portfolio, just maybe with a different vehicle. So I think those are just some suggestions that I have.
Thank you, Jen. Another question is, how can we better connect lender offerings with what the consumer is truly looking for regarding financing options in their early shopping and researching?
I think this piece, and you've heard it a lot today, but I think it's establishing those partnerships. Bringing the lender piece together, and across the journey and the funnel, and unless there's going to be some very intentional sort of tech and data investments and very material changes in strategic strategy for lenders, it's going to take those partnerships, to be able to engage with them and have your offering in the right place at the right time. And I think it's important that you look at where the consumer is really starting their journey and move way up funnel and be part of the education and the research to help sure that they're being quoted the information that's accurate and build confidence and trust and start to establish that relationship. I came out of the dealership side of things and for a very, very long time, and spent some time on the lending side. And it's always a tough struggle to find that balance between, should the dealer have that relationship, or do the lenders need to move up front? I think it has to happen. And I think the answer is both. But even the dealer now is becoming very late funnel in terms of how much research is happening online. So if lenders are going to have their data, their information, their programs in consideration, I think they have to be part of that experience up front in the research and the education phase. And I also think lenders, especially, it was really shocking for me when I came to MarketScan and I saw the number of times that a different lender was, drastically better in payments just because of the way the programs are structured or incentives can be applied and how much of an impact that can have to the consumer's payment. That if we don't have that information out there and upfront and be part of that consideration, we're really doing consumers a disjustice or a disservice by not having that. So, I think the key piece is having the accuracy of your information in the right place at the right time. But I think it's all going to come back to partnerships to be able to do that.
Great, thank you, Jen. Another question is, how can better data help lenders do a better job with transparency with the consumer?
I think from a standpoint of better data, better, sort of experiencing consumer transparency, I think it all goes actually, I think it goes kind of the other direction. I think having and providing consumers better information and better data to be able to make their decisions will ultimately help lenders do a better job because they can connect and come together. And I think the likelihood of capturing that deal is much better earlier on. Certainly, the better the data you have, and whether that's application or understanding of what the situation of the customer helps lenders make a more confident decision and get closer to the right sort of callback or the right approval faster. And I know speed's an important thing, but I do think the transparency piece is really around being able to, in some way, it's not unlikely somebody's going to hand over their scorecard, but how do you provide the elements and get more sophisticated than some of the rate matrices or some of the assumption-based elements that are going into what a consumer gets quoted, because it's very generic, it's very just score-based. And so I think if you can get that information or find some balance to ensure that it improves the accuracy of the information that the consumer is getting quoted, I do believe that's going to be critical for the future. And I do think it's going to help from capturing further share and improving the experience and the transparency. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yes, thank you, Jen. The last question is, in regards to what you covered in terms of the digital strategy, what do you suggest we do to deploy the right technology in our quest to go to the market as soon as possible?
Well, there's some former technology colleagues that are probably laughing that I'm going to attempt to answer this question. So from a standpoint, I think one of the big pieces, like lenders for quite some time have really struggled, to make sure that they have the right sort of technology or make the right investments to be able to bring the pieces together. And just even from the basic connecting data internally, and being able to action off of it, make sure it communicates. So there's just a lot of legacy technology debt. And I think the key piece is obviously beyond the broader sort of institution strategy or the business unit strategy around technology. I think when you look at these partnerships or the investments, I think it's really important that you're looking at and investing in having sort of modern development languages, making sure that you're leveraging platforms, cloud-based, scalable, secure, and really, looking to things like APIs that can drastically reduce the speed and time to market to be able to adopt that into your strategy, whether it's your internal platforms or your partners. But the world of APIs has really allowed, companies to do what they do best and bring those companies together through partnerships and be able to very quickly get to market and execute. So, those are just kind of some key things that I would suggest. And again, I think, this theme is coming up quite a bit, but I'm a firm believer that it's going to be a lot of partnerships because it's unlikely that anybody, just let alone financial institutions or lenders, are going to be able to continue to keep and make the investments in technology to be that cutting edge. So it's going to take those partnerships to be able to, I think, really help solve those problems and continue to evolve. But just my perspective.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen and MarketScan. We really appreciate all that you do. Do you want to say any concluding remarks, Jen?
Yeah, I just, Marcy, thanks for hosting us today. Thank you again to AFSA, and thanks for everybody that joined. We're really excited to be a part of AFSA. We've made some great strides in the problems we help solve, and if we can ever be a partner to any of you, please don't hesitate to reach out. But just thank you for the time today, and it's an exciting year ahead of us, and looking forward to working and partnering with the industry. So, but thanks for the time today.
Thank you so much. This concludes today's webinar.